Okay, let's start officially. Welcome to session VSP1883. It's about best practices in Power CLI. First of all, the standard slide, you've seen it X number of times this week probably, the disclaimer. You all know it by heart by now, so I'm not going to read it. About us, Alan.
So I'm going to introduce you to Luke Deakins, although I'm sure he doesn't need much introduction himself. He's been a V-expert since the age of 5. That's about right, isn't it?
Approximately, yes.
He works for Eurocontrol and is based out of Belgium. He has an excellent blog. Hands up if you've been to Luke's blog. Hands up if you've stolen his code and reused it. Yeah, I keep my hand up in the air too because I do that all the time. He is Luke D on the VMTN Power CLI community. So again, everybody use the Power CLI community? Yeah, have you all raised questions in there? And has Luke answered your questions within a couple of minutes, probably? Yeah, okay. Luke needs no introduction.
Thanks. Okay, Alan is the same thing. In fact, you don't need an introduction for him. Alan has been a V-expert for 2 years until he joined. Apparently, he is a new V-expert now this
Apparently
year.
I am. I found out today, yes.
First, there was a rule that VMware staff couldn't be a V-expert, but we just learned that he gets it for 2011 as well. Okay, like I said, Alan joined VMware earlier this year, but he has a blog going on the Power CLI subject, which you probably all know. All these fancy reports, vReport, vCheck. I'm pretty sure this runs in thousands of data centers all over the world on a daily basis. If you don't know it, have a look at his blog. It's fantastic. He also has a podcast together with Jonathan Met, another big guy. He is a PowerShell MVP, in fact, and he is a V-expert since this year, so it's definitely worthwhile listening to their podcast from time to time.
Thanks, Luke.
Now, what are we going to do here today? Okay, I already told you to move eventually to the screen where you can read the code. What we are going to do is, we're not going to give you a Power CLI intro. So there's still time to leave the room if that was what you thought we would be doing. And it's not a how-to for vSphere. We did that in the other session. So we're not going to tell you how to use auto-deploy, image builder, whatever is new in vSphere 5. What we are going to tell you today is we're going to show you a collection of best practices that we think are useful to know. These are the pitfalls that both of us stumbled in during our years of working with Power CLI. So we thought it would be handy to present them in a kind of list. You read through them, and it avoids you falling in the same pit that we stumbled in. Where did we get them? That's from the Power CLI community, replies, and even creating some of our blog posts, and from conversations we had with people we met wherever. So like I said, it will be a selection. It's a lot of them in there. I think it's a lot. It's 41 at the moment. What we are going to do is we're going to give you 3 sequences of best practices that we think are a bit related. That's all the way up to 18. And then from there on, it's audience participation. You can shout out numbers, and we will tackle those best practices. All the best practices will eventually be in the slides that will be published on the VMworld site after VMworld Europe, I assume. Alan.
So, like Luke said, we've been learning PowerShell for a couple of years now, and it's fairly new to the VMware market and managing VMware systems. But PowerShell itself's been around for a while with the Microsoft applications. So, hopefully, you've all used PowerShell before. Can I just see a raise of hands for people that have used PowerShell? This is a good start. And Power CLI? Cool stuff. Okay, so one of the things that we did in the session yesterday was took any questions and answered them as they came up. So if there's something on the screen that we don't describe properly or doesn't work properly, it really works great if you just raise your hand and say, I'm not getting this, or how does that work, or, do you need to do this with that, or whatever. So just don't be afraid. We don't bite. Put your hands up, and you might get a copy of the book that Luke and I co-authored. So please just ask us any questions.
But use the microphones preferably, because this is recorded, so they would like to hear your question as well.
Or put your hand up and I'll repeat it. So we'll start off with, I mean, this is going to be a deep dive, okay, so fasten your seatbelts. One of the things, the reasons we are doing this is because last year we did a kind of a generic Power CLI session, talking about Power CLI from the start to end, and we got a lot of comments saying, we want to know more, we want the deep dive stuff, we want to, really get into the nuts and bolts and do some cool stuff with it. So hopefully some of the stuff that we've got included in here will take it that little step further. And again, I do apologize if it's that too far, but please do let us know so that we can adjust it if we do another session in the future. And if you start falling asleep, I will throw one of these books at you. And that's a pretty hefty book. Yeah. So let's start off with knowing your objects. Now, when you return an object in PowerShell, and specifically in Power CLI, what you actually get back is a representation of the server-side object, and within that representation is the details that the Power CLI development team have done the research on and are the kind of things that they think you want. So the object you will get back is stuff like the name. So if I do a get VM, I'll get a virtual machine object back. And in that virtual machine object, I will get stuff like the name, how many hard disks it's got, the CD-ROM, the kind of stuff that you would expect to see in there. But it doesn't include everything. Everything is inside this server-side object. And the reason that we at VMware do this is because we want to give you the best performance out of PowerShell and Power CLI that we can give you. So if we returned everything to you, it would take a long time to do a get VM. And it would make the tool kind of really hard to use because you'd be waiting forever for these results to come back. So we return the information that we think you need to see. We're not always right, and if you expect something in there, please do let us know in the communities. We'll pick it up. We'll make sure it's in there in the next version or discuss with you why it should be there. But there are these shortcuts that you can use to actually get all of the data for those times that you do need that extra 10, 15% of the information that isn't in there. One of those is the get view command. So what that will actually do is go to the host and or vCenter and get the full object, so all of the information from the server side. As of 4.1, we also introduced the extension data property. So having said all of that I just said with the get view, now we've actually given you a little shortcut. So when you do a get VM, one of the properties you will see on there is the extension data. Now within the extension data, you do actually have the full config of the get view commandlet. So you will get the full server-side object back and all the details within that. And that's calculated once you actually use that property. So again, it's all about speed. It's about getting you the information that you need or we think you need, with the option to go there and dig a bit further if you need it.
Okay, like Alan said, you only get part of the properties that are available on the server side in your Power CLI or .NET objects. Now, if you display these on a screen, you will even see less properties. Typically, if you do a get VM of one specific VM, you get 4 or 5 columns, standard properties, name, number of CPU, the state of the thing. Now, why is that you even see less on your screen? That's because of these format files. They have the extension PS1 XML. They live in the directory where you installed Power CLI. Now, you can edit these directly to change this behavior, but there's also a commandlet available in PowerShell that allows you to interact with these format files. So if you want to see another property in your default display, or you even want to change the width of a specific column, suppose the VM name is always displayed as 25 characters, and you happen to have an environment where they can go all the way up to 35 or 45, you can change this default width in this PS1 XML file, or through the standard format commandlets that are available in PowerShell. Now, to see what is available in these objects that are returned by getVM, getVM host, you have this standard commandlet, which you all should know if you use PowerShell. That's a get member. The get member will return all the properties, but also all the methods that are available on a specific object. Now, in short, a method, what is that? That is a kind of a function that you can call on this object. For example, on a VM, you will have a method that allows you to relocate it, which is a vMotion or an svMotion eventually. So immediately when you have this object, you also have access to specific functions on that object. That's the properties. We'll show you more of that in the short demo that we will do later on. At the bottom there are a few samples how you can do this. You can get the get member without any parameter, then you will get everything. And you can say, I only want to see the properties and not the methods. So there you have a bit of freedom to select.
So we were talking about objects, and one of the things when you start learning PowerShell is you realize that it's no longer this prompt that looks like the DOS prompt. It doesn't just return text. Hopefully you've all got to that point where you realize that what's returned on the screen isn't actually what is being returned. You know, it's a whole bunch more information that's actually in there. So with nested objects, this all makes sense when you see the demo, so don't worry if this sounds a bit weird and you're starting to think, what's going on? The demo really does explain this well, and hopefully that'll put together what I'm trying to say. But with an object, what's being returned to the screen isn't just what you get. You can expand that object and you can start looking further into that object. So when I do a get VM, all I see is the name, the power state, how much memory it's got, and the CPU. Whereas if I actually expand that object a little bit more, you realize that what's in that object is a lot more information, like I was talking about a minute ago. So there's a couple of tricks that you can use to take a look at this information. There's things like the select object and then expand properties. So that will actually expand one of the properties and show you the property, the sort of nested objects within inside that. And there's also, you could use get member in a loop, or there's a nice command called format custom, and then you specify a depth and how far you want to show that. Again, this will look cool in the demo. Doesn't make much sense in a slideshow.
Okay, these are the properties that are there. They come with PowerCLI. Now you can, if you're working with these objects, sometimes you want to add extra information in that object. And that's what you can do. You can add new properties to any object. There's a new commandlet since 4.1, I think. The New-VIProperty. This allows you to make a new or define code, in fact, how you calculate the new property, and that will always be displayed on the specific object type, a virtual machine or a VM host or a data store, whatever, where you do a select. What it does, in fact, under the cover, it adds a code property. Code property is nothing more as saying this is a property and it's calculated through code, hence the code property name, and you can see this later on in the demo, how you can actually see the value of this code. Now, how long do they live? They live during your session. You make them. Once you stop your PowerCLI session, these definitions are gone. Or, and that's what we will show you in the demo and in future slides, you can use a kind of a module or definitions in your profile file, and they will always come up when you start your PowerCLI session. Another thing that a lot of people seem to encounter is you have an object and you want to add additional objects. We just did the New-VIProperty. You can also add a specific property to a specific instance. That's what you do with the add member. So if you look at this slide, at the drawing, the pink part on the left, that's the standard, the fixed number of properties are there. You can easily add extra functionality, extra properties to each of these objects. And this can be different for each instance of this property. So that's where the add member commandlet comes in. Very handy if you want to add additional information. What you can also do, and this in fact defines a new object in itself. The previous one was an instance, one specific instance of an object. This is more what you do with the struct definition. What you do there is you define a complete new object. You have to fall back on a bit of C# or F# or whatever of the other languages that are supported by PowerShell. And you can use the add type to add this definition to your environment. There's a few things that you should watch out for. This type, you can add it, but you can't remove it unless you stop the session completely. So what I normally do is I add a bit of a random part to the name of this new property, the new structure. In this case, at the bottom line, you see how I can add 4 digits at the end of the name. So this gives me a good chance that I will never have a collision whenever I change the definition of that structure without restarting my complete Power CLI session.
So one of the tip that's on the screen at the moment is one that's actually bit me before. So when you return virtual machines, they can have varied amounts of items in them. So say you return a virtual machine and it has 5 network cards. The next one has 1 network card. The next one has 6 network cards. Well, if you've got a MAC address for each of those network cards and you want to return the virtual machine and all of those MAC addresses, when you actually do this in PowerShell and you push it through to the Export-Csv or the out grid view command, it will actually take the first object and look at how many properties that has, how long that is, and it will use that as the base template for the rest of the items in there. So in my example, if I had a VM with 1 NIC and then a VM with 2 NICs, and I export both of those to CSV, the second one will only show 1. Now this, I'm sure, is what would Microsoft call it? A feature, maybe? Yeah. So this is probably a feature of the commandlets. But one way we found of getting around this is to actually sort the property that you're interested in and actually count them to see which one has the most properties in it. So once you've got that, you can kind of put that one at the top and then export the rest. But the key thing to remember about this is the ordering might not be what you want. So when you export the CSV, you might have to bring it back up and reorder that. Now we have a demo of this in the demonstration that we'll show you. Luke.
Okay, can I move this? Okay. So we should switch the screen, perhaps.
That might help.
That might help to show them. Okay, this first line is just a thing that I used to do, that I normally do. It avoids all these yellow warning messages that you normally get of obsolete properties, so that's a handy one. What we're doing here is we're getting some objects. Classical one, we do a get host, store it in a variable. And what we're doing now is we're going to look at the name of the type behind that object. And as you can see, and as we showed in the slide earlier, it returns a VM host implementation EMPL type of object. If we get the same host, but now we get the server-side object with the get view commandlet, and if we now do a get type and look at the name of this type, we will see that we get a host system. So this last part, this shows that you in fact now are looking at an object that corresponds with the managed object that is available in the API reference guide online, or which you can download locally. This one, the last one, is to show you that the extension data, like Alan said earlier, maps to the exact same one as what you get with the get view commandlet. This is with the get member. This shows you all the methods at the top and all the properties that are returned, in this case in a specific object for a virtual machine. You can select them with the select object. You pick out whatever you want. Notice how the hard disks has curly braces around them. This indicates that it's an array. So again, this is not a simple value. This is, again, a specific object. That's what we do with the expand property. We look at what actually is inside such a nested object. And as you can see, there are some detailed properties that come up. This is this famous format custom commandlet. It dumps up till a certain det that you define in the parameter, the complete object with all its properties and values. As you know, and we will show this later on, there is a module where we compiled or we collected a number of new VI properties to make it easier for you. So if you import a module, you will have them all in one go. If you look at the top here, you will see that there's a number of code properties that were added to this object. These are the ones that came in thanks to this new VMproperty commandlet. So it allows you to expand what is available in your standard objects. What we're doing here is we are showing you the definition. If you now would expand the value one on the right, that is in fact the code block. That is how you calculate this new property that you added to the standard object. Okay, we look again, and what we see is an extension property, and we'll now going to actually use it on a select. So we select the name and the new property we just added to this VM host object. Okay, this is a bit of a technical problem. The value is there on the right of the screen. You will see it in a minute when we zoom out again. This is something else. This is where we will show you can start in PowerShell with an empty object. That's this PS object, in fact. And then with add member, you can add whatever you want in there. These can be simple values, like in this case a string. Well, just a remark, the 19 value for the number of VMs on that specific host is visible. You can also, on this new empty object that you created, you can also add more complex properties. In this case, we add an array of strings. That means 2 strings separated by a comma is an array. And you can, of course, select asterisk asks for all the properties, and you can just display it. So in those few lines, we just created an object from scratch, which can be very handy in your scripts if you want to collect information from different sources. So add member is certainly something that you need to know. What we're doing here is we're selecting a number of properties, exporting them to a comma-separated file. And now we have another function. This function will get, for each machine, the MAC addresses. For each NIC card in a machine, the MAC address. Okay, we execute this script. It stores the result in a variable report, which we will use in a second. Okay, just call the array with all the information. We do a format list, just displays it on screen. As you can see, there are different types of entries. You have machines with 1 MAC address, you have machines with 2, 3, and so on. Now, if you want to export this in this format, like Alan just explained, it will take the first entry in that array, look at the number of properties in there, and define that number of columns in your CSV file. Which is a problem if you happen to have the one with the 1 NIC or the 2 NIC at the top, because you will be missing information from those with 3, 4, or more NICs. So this is our solution. We just calculate. We ask how many properties are there on this object, and we sort descending. Means the biggest one, the longest one is at the top. We export again to a CSV. Now, just to show you what the difference is, this is the one, if it comes back in a minute, this is the one that we exported, the first one, without ordering on the properties. Wait, we just arrange the 2 screens so you can see the difference. Pause it if you want. Okay, these are the 2 CSVs. As you can see, the top one is missing a lot of information that you have available on the bottom one. That's the one where we actually ordered on the number of properties available on an object. So this is quite handy if you want to have complete information in your reports.
So moving on a little bit, let's do a bit of audience participation to wake you up again. So how many people in the room manage 1 VM? Yeah. How many in the room manage 100 VMs? Okay, so moving on, 1,000? 10,000? Above 10,000?
Again.
Yeah, so we've got some good numbers in the room. The next tip that we want to talk about will help you out if you're using Power CLI and when working with a lot of objects, you obviously want to make it as fast as possible to get the information back. So that's one of the great things that GetView comes in handy for, because you can return the items and only return the pieces of information that you want. Now, the 2 examples you see on the screen do exactly the same thing. You will get exactly the same results. The first one is obviously our nice way of doing it. It makes sense. It's get VM host, so you're getting a list of the hosts, and then you are selecting the name and the power state. The second one looks a bit more developer-like and isn't maybe as English as you would like it to be when you're learning PowerShell. But if you look at the speed increases, if you're managing 100 VMs, it doesn't really matter. 500, it starts to, get a bit weird. And if you go to 1,000, you can see that our other item returns a lot faster than the actual formatted get VM host item that we return. So this is a great tip to use if you're managing, thousands and above that for some of you virtual machines.
Question.
Sorry? That's seconds. Yes, it does. Absolutely.
It would be better, but not comparable to GetView would still be better, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, they are. That's right. Yeah. So, the question was from the gentleman over there. Are these the same views that are the views that you get from the direct API calls? So, yes, they are. And, your question?
Second.
Oh, yeah, okay. So would it be faster if we use the extension data? And our answer was probably not, no. It's better to use the get view. Let's give a book out. And I liked your question. No problem.
Okay. This difference between the get VM host and the get view with the type of host system, this improved your speed, but you can even make it more faster. So we had faster, this is faster. If you only select specific properties, you don't always want the complete host system object to be returned. If you're only interested in a summary, specify that in the property. It will make it even faster. And you can go down in the complete object of the host system to make it even more faster. So if you only need 2, 3 values, properties that are available deep down in the host system object, define that. It will make your commandlet a lot faster.
And one of the other things that you can do with the get view command is apply a filter to it. So the key thing to remember about the filters and why we included this in the best practices is that the item that you see inside the filter is actually a regular expression match. So this is great when you've got a host called ESX01. But what happens if you've got multiple hosts? So you've got ESX011 and further on. You can start getting issues with the regular expression characters, especially if the regular expression has special characters in it that mean something in regular expression, like our example on the screen there, ESX and then open bracket. So the open bracket actually means something in regular expression. So if we were to run that, you would get no results, which is why we did the kind of last 2 lines on there that escapes the regular expressions and passes that property to the filter to retrieve the results. Again, this stuff will make more sense in the demo.
Okay, and this is a final tip to make your queries even more faster. This is something that was posted on James Brundage's blog. He was one of the guys that was part of the PowerShell team, I think, or quality control for the PowerShell team.
Yeah, I think so.
What happens, and I will make this clearer with this drawing, I hope. If you add an object, so you know this typical loop, you're running through a number of VMs or a number of VM hosts, you're adding row by row to a specific report. If you do it that way, what will happen is what you see at the top. You have an array, the pink part on the left, and you have a new object, the orange part. Inside, it will allocate a new array with a dimension to hold the original number of entries plus the new entry. And then it copies the complete stuff over of the old entry and adds the new line in there. So what James proposed and what he showed us in a sample is to use the linked list. This is another form that is available standard in your .NET environment. It uses, again, objects, but it uses a pointer to each next object. So you don't have to do this copy process that you see at the top. Especially if you're working with large environments and constructing large arrays, this will make your code a lot faster. Okay, there's a code sample in here. You can find this back, or you can go to the blog post of James and look it up, what the details are. No, do go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, we had a question.
Will your demos be available on the slides or?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the slides that you see here and the best practices that we don't mention will be part of the slide deck when it's on VMworld site.
But you mean the video, I think.
Yeah, with the video. So you can see our ugly mugs again. We will also probably release these on our sites just to make sure, and it makes it easier for you guys to ask questions about them in the comments section. So yeah, luked.info and virtual.net.
Okay, switch to this. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm going to measure the execution time of some typical commands, what we showed you earlier. So this is a standard get VM. Okay, we shortened this, we cut some of the video because it will take quite a bit of time, and we didn't want to have you waiting here 60 seconds before the result was returned. Now we do the same thing, we fetch the same kind of objects, but from the server side. And if you see at the result here, it's 4 seconds. It's already 15 times faster. And our next step is when you get such an object, a virtual machine again, but you only need specific properties, specify them in this property parameter. This will make it even more faster. So again, we have a speed improvement of nearly 2.5 there. Now, this is going to show you what we mean with the filter part and the regular expressions. The first one is a standard get VM with a specific name. You see that it returns 1 machine in this case. Now, if we do the same thing on a get view and we use this filter construct, and we tell it it's the name VM1 that we want, it will return all of a sudden a lot more machines. Now, why is that? It's a regular expression. That means it will also return the ones 1.0, 1.1, 1. Whatever comes behind it. Now, how can you solve this? You can use, again, a meta character, in this case the $sign, which tells the filter this should come at the end. There shouldn't be anything behind it. End of the line. So there again we have 1 machine return, just like we had with the regular get VM. This is the specific case where we have meta characters in the name. No, normally you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't have such names, but it works. With the normal get VM, you get the machine back. If we do this in a filter construct in get view, we see that we get 0 back. There is no hit on this kind of filter. Why? Because he interprets these brackets in another way. So what you can do is you can use this regular expression method, escape, and that will actually put backslashes before each meta character in the filter. And this avoids that kind of problem. So again, there we had 1 VM return, just like we had with the regular VM commandlet. The third of our series that we wanted to show, reporting. Most of you probably started off with reporting when you first used Power CLI. Now, generating a report in a PowerShell environment is rather simple. You get the data, you do something with the data, and you write it to where you want, on the screen, to a CSV, to another type of file. Simple example, at the bottom you get the VM, you pick up some properties from that virtual machine, and you store them in a CSV file. Nothing to it. But there's more. You can go a lot further. And there it is interesting to start using the PowerShell, what PowerShell has to offer you. And there are 2 commandlets that we think are very useful in here. There's the sort object. We saw it earlier when we ordered the number of properties in a descending order. And you have the group object. Let's just have a look at the code sample here. What we did here is we have a few samples of this sort object commandlet. You want to see the top 5 of your VMs that on the level of memory consumption. That's what you get here. You just select that property, memory in megabytes, and you order them in a descending order, and then you just pick the first 5 of them. So there you have it. In a couple of lines, you have your top 5 memory users in your environment. VNICs, virtual network cards. You know there are several types available. You have the E1000, you have VMXNet2, VMXNet3. You want to see what is available or what is used in your environment. That's what we do here. We look at the type, so we get for each VM, we get the NICs that are there, and we look at the type of the NIC that is specified. In this case, we use sort object with a unique parameter. So it will only retain a line if it is a unique value. So it will not show you 3 times your VMXNet2 entries. It will only show it once. So this is a handy way of seeing what number of types you have available in your environment. You can do the same thing. You can group them based on the type. That's what we do with the group object. And then you just select the name, because the group object will do everything that we showed in the second example for you. And then you just select the name and the count of each group that is returned. Okay, I'm not going to explain this one line by line, but where this group object comes in very handy is when you're working with statistical data. So you all know, or you should know, the get_stat commandlet, which allows you to access all this data. It is handy to do this in one call. Don't call this for every VM in your environment. So that's what we're doing. We're doing it for all the VMs, if you look at the second line. But that means later on when I want to report, I want to have my report lines again, VM per VM. So we do in the group object, which is shown on the 3rd line, we order this thing on the name of the VM, which makes it very handy. We get, per VM, we get back a group where we can calculate our values and display them in the report. So this is quite useful to know if you want to make reports with statistical data. There's lots of small handy things in PowerShell that help you in creating those reports. Calculated properties, I think most of you know them by now. It's the things that start with the @ sign. So you have a name and an expression. You make a new property. In the expression, you do a kind of calculation or a reformatting or whatever you want to display it in your report. There's also a format operator, the -f, or you can write it full as format. For example, this could come in handy if you want to display your worldwide names as a hex string instead of the decimal that they normally return. So quite useful to know. You can use it for calculations. For example, the default data store property nowadays still returns megabytes. Now, I don't know about you, but my storage is rather measured in giga or even terabytes. If you want to convert this in your report, use a calculated property and use what is available in PowerShell. In this case, I used the round function, which allows you, instead of getting a long number with a lot of digits behind the decimal point, you can limit this to 1 digit behind the decimal point. Also, a very nice feature to use. And again, use what is available in PowerShell itself. What is also quite useful, you know that your vSphere environment is a tree structure. If you look in your vSphere client on the left, you have data centers, clusters, hosts, resource pools. I can imagine that there's sometimes a report where you want to run through all these, through this complete tree structure that you have there. At that point, it becomes interesting to use a recursive function. So that means you have a standard function that will report the data or the properties you want for each node in your tree, and it calls itself again with each of the child nodes in that tree. Before you use this, there is a limit built in PowerShell. If you reach 1,000 in your recursive depth, it will stop. Now, I haven't seen an environment where you have a tree with 1,000 nodes deep. Most of the time, this indicates that there's something wrong with the logic in your script. So if it stops for that, have a look at the script again. There is a code sample, if I can reach it. Okay. Not going there line by line, but if you look at the top, we just define a function, this getViPath, and it calls itself again for each node that it finds. So this is very handy for traversing a complete tree in your environment. It will be in the slides. I'm not going to go into this line by line.
So we're talking about reporting at the moment, and that is generally one of the areas where people will get started with Power CLI and PowerShell. And the reason they do that is because if you run a get command, all you're doing is retrieving data. So it's a great place to be safe and know that you're not going to mess anything up and accidentally delete all your VMs and be out of a job. Now, there is obviously fail-safes in PowerShell that will make sure that you don't do that. But it's always great to start off with a nice, familiar, easy way to do reporting. Now, one of the things that I started off with was converting one of my scripts that I had, which was a VB script. I found that if I converted that, it would kind of teach me PowerShell at the same time, because I knew what was in my script from VB script. And if I wanted to learn PowerShell, I could kind of go line by line and go, okay, how would I do this in PowerShell? And you know, several iterations later, it's that much smaller, and I know that much more, and you know, you just keep learning. And that's actually the VCheck was the base of the VCheck report. Does everybody know about the VCheck? Is anybody using the VCheck report on your virtual infrastructure? Okay, so some of you are. For those of you who aren't, it's a script. Sorry, self-publicizing here. It's a script that's available on my site that basically goes out to your virtual infrastructure, will read a whole bunch of information, and then display it in a nice HTML report. Now, the idea behind this script is it's not an audit report. So you run it in a scheduled task, and you run it every single day, and you run it first thing in the morning. So when you get in the morning, you've got a nice email in your inbox in nice HTML formatted colors and all that kind of nice stuff. And it gives you information about your infrastructure. So it will give you information about problems that you might have, like data stores that are running low on space, snapshots that have been around over a certain amount of days, VMs that have been created. And the great thing about that is it just doesn't give you the VM. It will tell you who created it. And it will also go back into Active Directory, find their name, and give you the person that created it, not just a user ID. So it's got a whole bunch of checks in there. There's about 42 checks. If you get a chance, please do check it out. Absolutely free, easy to install, easy to use. And the reason I bring that up at this point is it is designed to run as a scheduled task. Now, most of the comments I had on my site to do with this script was actually people that couldn't get the scheduled task working. Not asking me for more stuff or saying, you know, this script's a load of rubbish. It's actually people saying, how do I get this to run as a scheduled task? It's just, you know, it doesn't work because you've got to put quotes in and you've got to put all kinds of stuff to get this stuff to work. Even though I did put an example on my site, so maybe I didn't make it clear enough. But one of the great things that we can do now is somebody's actually written a TaskScheduler module, so you can download this module and import it, and this makes it easier for me because you can now create tasks within PowerShell. So if we take a look at the code, you can actually see how easy it is to create these tasks. So now it's just a case of me putting this information on my site and saying, okay, I'm not going to tell you how to create a scheduled task, but just run this code and it'll do it for you. And everybody's happy. I'm happy because I get less comments about it not working. But there's a few things that you need to remember about scheduled tasks, especially when using them in Power CLI and PowerShell. When you add a scheduled task, you will have to give it credentials to run as. Now remember, the credentials you are giving it to run as are the credentials that the script will run under. So I've seen this loads of times. People will set up a scheduled task, and before they do that, they'll run the script on the server. Maybe they've got a server that runs all their scheduled tasks, all their batch files, all their jobs. And they'll run the PowerShell script, and it'll work fine. It'll give them the results. It'll send them the email. So they'll schedule it as a task, and nothing will happen. And the reason is that they've logged in as themselves, run the script, and they've got all the permissions they need. They can connect to the virtual infrastructure absolutely fine because they're logged in with their credentials. You know, they've got a PowerShell session. They've done the set execution policy, so it enables them to run scripts. But they haven't logged in as this task that they've set to use as the credentials for the scheduled task. So it's always best to log in, if you can, as that account. And just make sure that PowerShell is set up correctly and that you can run the script and that you get the results back. Has that scheduled task account got the permissions it needs to virtual infrastructure to read that information? So this is kind of a gotcha and a kind of watch out for it and just, common sense stuff. And also, obviously, leave no interaction in your script, because if it's running as a scheduled task, nobody's going to answer that. Another great thing that we can do with PowerShell as well, in PowerShell version 1, we had the net.mail message object, so we could send items as a email. In PowerShell version 2, they did a fantastic thing and actually gave us a commandlet to do that, rather than having to use the net mail message. So now, if I just take a look at the version 2 code, because hopefully you'll all be using version 2 and not version 1 anymore, we can actually see how easy it is to send an email. So you can see that all we're doing here is defining who it's from, defining who it's to, the subject, and then we're using this send mail message to send this email. Very easy, a nice thing to do to get the results back. PowerShell also makes it really easy to format things nicely, to produce HTML files. There's the export to HTML, which will take the results and export those straight to a HTML. And you can even start getting fancy and start using style sheets and stuff like that. An example of that is the vcheck script that I was talking about earlier. Or if you've run the script that I created for VRAM, which basically tells you what you've got in your V4 infrastructure and then tells you what entitlements you will have if you upgrade to V5, then it's that exact same kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is really easy in PowerShell to do.
Okay, this is the last one of our fixed number of slides. We already touched earlier that you can send mail through PowerShell, nowadays with the send mail message. Since all of you are running version 2, it's quite easy. There is now a switch parameter on that commandlet which allows you to define this should be sent as an HTML message. In the past you had to go and change a property. Now it's just a switch on the same commandlet we saw earlier. So we see a lot of questions of people who want to get these fancy reports in HTML format in their mailbox. Okay, like I said, this was the end of the fixed part. We are now going into the random part. So if you would like, anyone, shout out the number between 19 and 41, or if you have a question specific and we have a slide on it, please feel free. 41. There's always one that wants the last slide, of course.
Now he's got to scroll right the way to the bottom, and I've got to do some kind of dance to keep you all entertained. And it's your fault.
But if we were lucky, Power CLI man would come in, but...
Who's Power CLI man?
Wait a minute, I'm nearly there. Okay. You want to do this one, or? We already touched it, in fact, earlier on the New-VIProperty. This, again, summarizes what you have there in this New-VIProperty commandlet. That's a code property.
Yeah, sorry. This is actually one of the new commandlets, and this is one of my favorites because it takes all the hard work out of creating your reports and digging deeper into those longer objects that we were talking about. And it enables you to get the information that you need. And especially if you download Luke's module that he's created, where he's gone through the communities and he's taken a lot of the properties that he thinks you need and that people need in the community and people have suggested to him, and he's put all of these into a nice module. All you do is import that, and you've got some really cool information that adds on there. Another number? 36. Invoke-VMScript. This is a cool commandlet. Put your hands up if you've used this commandlet. It's fairly new. Yeah, so what this enables you to do is reach inside the VM and run a script through the VM tools service. So you will need VM tools installed on your virtual machine. Hopefully you've all got that installed. The credentials you will have to do is supply the credentials to the guest machine, because obviously we don't want just anybody running a script inside your virtual machine. And it basically runs the script and returns the results to your PowerShell session. So if you think about it, this is absolutely great for getting information inside your VMs and not just staying at the hypervisor level. So, question?
Just the method that the new version of SRM uses to change the data?
No. Oh,
no. They use the same VIX call, but it's not invoking Invoke-VMScript. But it's the same principle, that is true. As you notice, there are 2 slides on this, so I brought this one up. You get 2 slides for the price of 1 here. To use this fix, as Alan explained, there are a few requirements that you have to have. VMware Tools needs to be installed. Remember that this thing talks over port 902 to the ESX server where the machine is running, the virtual machine.
Sorry, we had another question? So the question was, is 902 configurable at all?
Not that I know of, sorry. Yeah. That's
good question.
Good question. Okay, something I have noticed, and I don't think there's an official statement on there. If you do a connect VI server before you call this Invoke-VMScript, and you do it with a short name, just a host name, you will be able to make a connection, but sometimes your Invoke-VMScript fails. And I notice if you do the connect in the beginning with a full qualified name, your Invoke script will work. So it's worthwhile if you use that commandlet to do a fully qualified domain name. There's another question there.
Yes, it does. You can reach inside your Linux machines and run a shell script or shell
Bash
command.
scripts.
Bash.
Now, the number of Linux distributions that are supported is limited. It's not any Linux. So the supported platform is lower than the number of supported distributions VMware supports on their ESX servers. That is clear.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, if you were to deploy multiple virtual machines and you wanted to reach inside them after you deployed them to run a batch file to further configure them, could you do that? Yes, you can. And that's the cool thing about PowerShell, is that if you think about it, it's not only Microsoft creating these PowerShell commandlets. They started off creating these, and everybody else kind of jumped on the bandwagon. Now, VMware has the second biggest PowerShell community outside of Microsoft. So, you guys are amazing, so give yourselves a clap for that. That's awesome. And the point I'm trying to make here is, if you think about it, Cisco also have commandlets for their UCS systems. So NetApp have commandlets for their NetApp systems. EMC have them for EMC, and companies keep going and going and going. So within one single script, you could actually deploy your UCS system using PowerShell. Once you've deployed it, you could use our new auto-deploy to deploy the ESXi hosts onto those blades. Once you've done that and they're all up and inside Virtual Center, you could connect to these hosts, create your virtual machines, reach inside your virtual machines, install your apps, maybe connect to Exchange, create your mailboxes, create your users. It's up to you what you want to do. It's kind of the integration, it's the glue, and that kind of stuff is just amazing. It's the kind of stuff that I wanted when I was a system administrator.
If I may, I brought up the second slide because this links tightly to the question you had. What you see here is a netshell command which will be executed inside your guest. It will in fact enable the NIC. So this shows you can intervene with the VM, although it's not visible on your network. You go in through the ESX server over the VIX connection, so you can do stuff in your newly deployed machines this way, execute standard Windows commands, but inside the machine.
Exactly, yeah. You do have to have the security context.
Yeah, that's why you need the guest credential there. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, correct.
Sorry, there was another question? No, okay.
Yep, we had another one. Yep. So the question was, could I put some nice graphs in my vcheck script? You would not believe how hard that is. The issue I have with that is, we can talk about this afterwards, but there's no nice, easy way for me to ensure that how I create these graphs is available on every single machine. I've got ways to do it, but yeah, we'll talk about this afterwards.
There's another question over there.
Yep. So does the Invoke-VMScript only work on 32-bit systems? No, it doesn't. The commandlet only used to work in the 32-bit version of Power CLI, but that has gone away with the version 5 release of Power CLI. You can now run the commandlet in a 64-bit PowerShell session, and it will connect to 32-bit and 64-bit virtual machines.
There's another one.
Another one? Does it return anything?
No, that's a bit of a problem. So if you do it in a single command line, you have to catch it somewhere. You can use the error level on the side of the guest and make that visible on the screen, and that will be returned. But it doesn't return the error level that you would have inside the machine. That's a bit of a problem.
Yep, it returns the output of the string, exactly right.
Yeah.
And remember, that isn't going to be formatted to a PowerShell object. That's going to be one long string.
Yeah.
So you would have to take that and format it and use some of the cool stuff in PowerShell to do that.
So you have to extract the data you want from the string yourself, but that's where the regular expressions come in very handy. So it's quite easy. If you have the same layout in the string, it's easy to extract what you actually want.
I think we've got time for one last question. Yep.
Do you have any tips for copying groups with all properties, not just the name and the email?
Yep. So do I have any tips for copying port groups from a host to another host with all the properties, not just the name and the VLAN? Yep. So yeah, you can definitely do that kind of stuff. If it's not available in the commandlets as they stand at the moment, then you can use the get-view commandlet to actually create your own objects and do that. And also another great tip is to use the Onyx product. Onyx is fantastic. It sits in between your virtual infrastructure client and your virtual center server, so it'll sit in the middle, and it will monitor the traffic that goes through. And the stuff that you can do with that is that you can say, you can create the port group using your virtual infrastructure client with Onyx monitoring, and when you've finished, it'll give you some nice PowerShell code to actually use and do that again, so you don't have to create these hard bits of code. I mean, alternatively, ask it in the communities, and you'll probably get an answer from Luke in like 10 seconds.
There are some samples available. If you do a search in Google on import, export, vCenter, I'm sure you will find some.
Yep.
I know Gabri van Zanten has a script posted for that. I think Maish also has a script that exports, imports. If you can't find it, drop us a mail and we'll point you in the right direction there.
Okay. So if there's certain...
Yeah.
I think there are certain things that are missing, some of the advanced stuff, and you can do that. Obviously, I don't have the code with me at the moment, but if you want to drop me an email, I can certainly help you out with that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for staying till the end.
Yeah.
And please remember to fill out the form that says we're amazing.